The United Nations has warned that time is running out to reverse the effects of climate change in a report that has been termed the most important document of its kind. Experts say we must act quickly to avoid destructive outcomes.
One, human influence on the climate system is clear and clearly growing. We must act. Second, we must act quickly and decisively if we want to avoid increasingly destructive outcomes. Three, we have the means to limit climate change and build a better future.
Joining me now from our central London studio is the Director of the Energy and Climate Intelligence Unit, Richard Black. Thanks for speaking to us here on Sky News, Mr. Black. Perhaps you can tell us why this report is different, because when the climate change story comes around, people do think we've heard all this before. So many times we've been told we have to act now to preserve future generations.
I think that's right. We have heard many bits of this story before. What makes this document so important is it summarises really the entire state of knowledge about climate science, projections of impacts around the world, climate economics, the various policy options that governments have, and it summarises it all into one 30-page document. We're coming up to a very, very important year in climate politics with a big UN summit at the end of next year in Paris, where governments are due to make a new global agreement. And this is, in a sense, the Bible that they'll be taking with them as their delegates decide what they're going to do.
And the report details the effects of ignoring the problem or putting it off. I mean, it talks about climate change, severe heat waves, extreme weather, and warns of worse to come, but it also talks about food shortages and violent conflicts.
Yes, I think what it's really doing is presenting a picture of two possible futures. There's the future where emissions are not constrained, where we see some of those things that you were talking about there, Sarah Jane, impacts particularly in the developing world on health, on crop availability, on fresh water, profound changes to nature, the oceans, melting glaciers all over the world, that sort of thing. On the other hand, the other world, which it says is feasible at fairly small economic cost, is where those worst risks of climate change are risks that we don't have to face. But what it says, in order to get there fairly cheaply, governments need to start acting now, and they need to act in concert so everyone's pulling in the same direction. And these very profound transformations that would be needed in society, the way we use energy and other aspects of our lives, they can all be planned out in a reasonable, gradual way.
So it's the most hardline report that's come out yet about climate change, but how much political will is there? Because most countries are worried about the economy and things that are affecting them right now.
That's absolutely right. And of course, there's a difference between worrying about the short-term economy and the long-term economy, because really, I suppose, if you had to sum up the economic message of this report, it's saying that if you incur the short-term costs now of making a low-carbon transition, then you will avoid much larger costs of climate impacts in the future. But there's one very interesting thing that emerged over the last week when government delegates and scientists and economists were finalising this report in Copenhagen, because what they've emphasised in this report is the need to end fossil fuel burning. This was something that was always tucked away in the bowels of the IPCC report, but it actually seems to be government delegates that have asked for this to be put front and centre. Essentially, if you want to curb climate change, it's not a question so much of aiming for some temperature target or some target in terms of concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. What you have to do fundamentally is end using fossil fuels at some point between 2050 and 2100. Now, that still seems like a huge ask.
I just want to pick you up on that. Because you talk about ending fossil fuels, but the report says that carbon emissions, mainly from burning coal, oil and gas, are currently rising to record levels, not falling.
That's absolutely right, and that's precisely what makes it such a big transformation. Many people will look at this in governments, in business, ordinary citizens, and think, well, that's just impossible. And it may prove to be impossible, but what the IPCC is mapping out is the consequences of not doing that. However, there are some trends that are very interesting and underreported. So there are signs, for example, that China's coal use may have peaked this year. Now, that's really important because China burns about half of the world's coal. We're seeing a number of other countries, Germany, Finland, Denmark, some developing countries like Costa Rica, Samoa, that are making pledges basically to end their carbon emissions within the next 40 or 50 years. So these are very profound transformations. The human race has never been faced with questions like this, I think, but there are signs that it might be doable.
OK, Richard Black, interesting to speak to you. Thank you very much for joining us here on Sky News this afternoon.